Okay, are we ready? Okay, we'll go for it. Okay, I've titled my talk Cyber Warfare, Report from the Trenches. Cyber Warfare I just grabbed because it has a lot of media hype right now. And from the trenches, we are somebody out there that are seeing a lot of cyber warfare type of activity, and I want to talk about some of that today. I'm going to cover the following topics: a little bit about my environment so you can see how it applies to you or where I'm coming from, a quick review of the problem, network and computer insecurity, talk about the threat that we see, a lot of the hacker and espionage activity coming in over the internet, and I'll summarize what we do at our organization in response to the threat, and wanted to also bring up a topic of some of our interactions with other ISPs as we help to resolve some of these issues, and then talk about some of the trends in the Department of Defense in case you're not aware of some of those. The environment I'm at, it's a Navy Research and Development Laboratory in San Diego, and just like most other government organizations, they have to change acronyms every few years, and so you may have known it by other names, but we have been involved in network research, network operations, and engineering support for many, many years. One of the early subscribers to the ARPANET, and has seen really a lot of trends over the years, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those this morning. I am not a security person, or didn't intend to be a security person, but because I was operating networks and was often the first one to discover attempted intrusions, illegal activity, and so forth, ended up getting sucked into that. And it started for me back in about '83. If you remember the good old days, the ARPANET, where everybody trusted everybody, we were more concerned about trying to make things work than trying to make things secure. And it's kind of like your parents talking about the good old days, you could leave your doors unlocked. And that's exactly the way it was. You didn't care much about even setting good passwords and so forth until the wake-up call where we actually were broken into from a UCLA student in 1983 just by doing simple password guessing. And he guessed the password Jones for the user who had a user ID of Jones. So it's pretty easy, pretty lame. But that's where it started for us, and it's gotten more sophisticated over time. And we historically have been very well connected, so we've been on the map for a long time and are fairly well known. The environment inside is very diverse, and it makes it very hard for us to secure the network. Being a research organization, there's lots of little projects, literally hundreds of them. Every little project has its own type of systems, its own software, its own system administrators, and so you can't come up with one cookie cutter, stamp out the common configuration for Solaris or NT, or you pick your operating system. That's just intractable. And so that huge diversity makes it very hard to secure. Also, they're configured to do research, experimentation. They don't have a lot of sensitive information on them. So the notion of the system administrators are, I don't need to worry about security. If someone breaks into my computer, that's okay. There's nothing they can really steal. I'll just reload it from the backup tape. And they don't realize that having an insecure computer on the network really makes our whole network vulnerable, because it can be used to be the home for snippers and launch other attacks. We have fairly high bandwidth to the open internet and fairly open access. We have multiple OC3 ATM connections to various ISPs, and typically, which is different than most of the rest of the Navy and DoD, we're quite open. We don't have a bastion host firewall per se, because it gets in the way of a lot of the research that's going on as we interact with educational institutions and other organizations. So the result is we're a very target-rich environment. And for the hacker community, they love to break into military sites because of the bragging rights and being able to see it in the paper, and being able to claim that they broke into some kind of a .mil system seems to be the challenge they're all after. And to them, it's also a game. We've noticed that too, that just from the type of sweeps that we see and the type of activity on the networks, it really is a game, and I'll talk about a little bit more about that in a minute. You all know why we have the problem we do. The computer systems we get are insecure out of the box. Takes a lot of work to configure them, protect them. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. Also, the administrators, especially in our environment, don't necessarily have the training to know how to secure their machines. They're not necessarily operating system experts. They're usually a secretary or somebody who's not 100% busy, and they're told, you take the backups on this machine and do the minimal administration, and so often they're fairly lame and don't have a clue. And we really see the whole spectrum, but it really makes us more insecure because of that. And so they're not putting in the patches, they're not keeping the systems up to date. And the other problem we really struggle with is at our location we're adding systems, vulnerable systems, faster than we can fix them. And I've got a chart on that. This is just from October of last year, where we were counting the number of new computers that were added to the network every day, and this is a monthly plot. So you can see it's on the average of about a little over 100 per week, new machines on our network at our site. That's the blue graph. The purple graph are the number of machines that are determined to be vulnerable, because every day we look for all the new machines that have appeared. We do vulnerability scans on them, try to find which ones are vulnerable, and usually it's about a 7% hit rate. Now, we have a team that we've put together of about 4 people who do nothing but go around and talk to the sysadmins and say, your machine is vulnerable, please fix it or we're going to shut it down, da-da-da-da-da. And they also offer help to try to fix those machines. So the white graph shows how many of those new machines that were vulnerable actually are getting fixed. And the delta between the white and the purple graph is expanding. And so this is to illustrate the point, we can't fix them as fast as they're coming on the network. So for us, that's a serious problem. Also, the exploit tools are readily available. Once the vulnerabilities are identified, they typically are turned into an exploit tool. Those tools soon show up on the various sites you're probably familiar with, like Root Shell and others. And so they are obtainable by the script kiddies and others who want to take those tools, put it into a script, do massive sweeps across the network to try to see what they can break into. And this is what we observe mostly at our place, a lot of these scans. And if there's a vulnerable machine out there, they will find it, usually. And so we're trying to stay one step ahead of the game. And the reason we know that this is really a game to them is because when we detect that someone's breaking in or trying to break in, we do a capture of all the traffic related to that connection, and we do playbacks on it, and we watch them and see what they're doing. And very typical scenario is you exploit a vulnerability, you get in, you get root access. You replace the login or some other program with a Trojan version so you can get back in later. Then you load something like rootkit to replace all the tools and logs and so forth, basically to hide your presence. And then what you do is you plug the original hole so that nobody else can exploit it. And we often see, for example, if they exploited an IMAP buffer overflow, they will go in and disable IMAP so someone else can't get in and use the same vulnerability. Or we've seen a lot on Solaris machines. Once they get in and break in, they'll actually go to Sun, download the patches, fix the machine so that they fix all the vulnerabilities for you. And after seeing this and talking to a number of folks, we found that it's all a game. The hackers break in, there's competition. They want to own the machine, but they want their competitors not to get in through the same hole. And so that's a very, very common scenario. It's all part of a big game. Password cracking tools are very good, and we see a lot of people trying to use those kind of tools. You're probably familiar with crack, but if you live in the NT world and the rest of the Windows world, there's this thing called loft crack, which is pretty amazing. And if you haven't seen it, I have a copy here, which I'll run real quick. What I did is went to the NT administrator and I said, I want a copy of the password file, and he says, oh yeah, it's encrypted, you can have it, no problem, it's safe. And then I ran this loft crack thing, and I think it has 4,560 some accounts in it, and here's how fast it goes. We're already up to 1% cracked. And the interesting thing is, if you look on the hash, yeah, you can see it. You can immediately spot, I mean, just by observing the encrypted string, you can immediately tell if someone has 7-character or less password because of the way they break it into chunks of 7 for backward compatibility with the older network protocols. So if you see the right-hand side, AAD, 3B4, whatever, you know instantly it's 7 characters or less. And so then you've just changed the, shortened the domain of what you have to try to brute force attack to 7 characters or less for all of those that appear in that format. And there's various other bogosities in the encryption algorithm. For example, they store everything also in all uppercase in just for the backwards compatibility. So that's all you have to really try for alpha only. So some of them that are 7 characters or less, you can break almost instantly just by trying just uppercase. We're already up to 200 and some passwords cracked. I let this run one night just on one of my laptops at home, and by the next morning I had, I think, 89% of our passwords cracked just in our own. So if you can get a hold of an NT off of a domain controller or by sniffing or whatever, get a hold of a password file, you're in. You can get passwords very easily. And so we see scanners installed whenever somebody breaks into a machine. They put on a scanner, scan for, they install sniffers to gather passwords so they can run crack, but then scanners to look for vulnerable ports on the various machines on the network. We see rootkit used a lot of denial of service attacks, buffer overflow attacks, and so forth, and I'm sure you're probably familiar with those. But the trend we've seen, which is of great concern, is that a few years ago, a few incidents per year where people were trying to break in, trying to scan, and it was a very rare event, and we would spend weeks writing reports, why the break-in happened, doing all the analysis and so forth. And now the activity is to the point where we have at least one major, if not multiple major incidents per day, where it's either a massive scan or somebody actually broke in. It's just really expanding fast. And a lot of the probes we see, a single probe will try to hit over 10,000 machines or tens of thousands of machines on a single day. And most of these are just these kids that download the scripts or put together scripts with the exploit tools, scan the whole network looking for vulnerabilities. And it's also becoming more and more sophisticated. These script tools are put together in these nice little packages which will sweep an entire network, look for all the vulnerabilities, and actually do it very fast, and in fact sometimes better than some of the commercial software. I have a couple of different pictures here. This one is the activity we've seen since August of last year, and we've categorized it by foreign and domestic. The blue on the bottom is domestic, the purple is foreign. So mostly it's foreign, usually a little bit more than the domestic attacks. And what you see here is a continuing trend. Last year it really was a lot less, as indicated August, September, but since about that time there's been a large leap, and it's stayed fairly static at a fairly high rate. And the other thing we do is try to keep fairly good track of exactly each one of these incidents and put them in a log on the web so that other people can look at them. And it helps in the analysis to compare with what other people are doing. And so if we just look at the activity in this month at our site, and we haven't put up the stuff from this past weekend yet. This past weekend we had a lot of activity from Korea, did a massive scan also from the UK. But if we look at just this month, you can see that sometimes when they do a sweep, here's 12,854 addresses that were scanned on that particular day. A lot of these are domestic, but here's Hungary, Japan, Mexico, China. You see a lot of Chinese activity. They're really trying hard to get in lately. South Korea, there's Japan again, Australia, Bulgaria, Michigan, that's not a foreign country, France, Sweden, and on and on. Here's one where somebody actually broke in. It didn't exploit a vulnerability, but in this case, somebody guessed a password, or must have guessed a password, because we saw somebody telling that in. And we've got our are profiles on our analysis tools tuned to look for certain things. And in this case, we caught them downloading some hacker tools. Just the login itself looked very normal. And it was the fact that they tried using some of the tools that we knew were hacker tools that we were able to catch them and got the user to change their password. So again, it reiterates, static passwords are bad. It can be sniffed. People can use it. And if they don't do anything that your profiles are tuned to, you may never know that they're into your machine. Here's some more from Hungary. We had a Smurf last week. And so fairly typical of what a lot of other people are seeing. I wanted to take a few minutes to go through some specific examples, tell some stories, things that we've seen over the years out of interest and probably for entertainment too. The one that had a lot of notoriety a few years ago was El Gritón, who was from Argentina. And we first discovered him in '95. And what we saw was activity into a number of our machines. He actually broke into some. And he was unique in that he hung around. A lot of the incidents are people come in, they'll break in, put in Trojans, and they go away, and you might never see him again. But El Gritón hung around for a while, and he was coming into us through Harvard University. And we weren't sure where he was coming into Harvard from. But what we did is got some cooperation with Harvard, letting us look at their logs, and saw that he was actually connecting to a lot of places around the country, and foreign countries as well. And what was particularly scary is we discovered him, and very, very few others noticed any of the activity. So we were calling a lot of the places he was breaking into. And I remember one in particular, which was really scary, is he got into some machines at JPL, and we called the sysadmin there and said, your machines have been broken into. He insisted that his machines were all secure, he could not get broken into, so we had to tell him, go look on this machine, look in this file, you'll find this file name, and here's the contents, because we captured it on the fly. And so he said, I'll look. He went and called about 5 minutes later. He says, oh dear, we got a problem. And it's just, he thought he did not have a problem because it wasn't showing up in his logs. He had no intrusion detection system, and so it really alerted a lot of the organizations we talked to that intrusion detection systems were probably very important. If you think you're not getting hacked, you're probably pretty naive. We eventually tracked El Gritón down through a wiretap that we put on the Harvard University network. And this was the first time there was ever a legal court-ordered wiretap on a network. And so it was precedent-setting in that sense, and we had to use some special software which, first of all, detected what his connection was by the type of activity he had, because he was coming in through a dial-up, and there was literally tens of thousands of users all on this one network. We had to isolate it so we didn't see the other students' traffic, but only his traffic. And once we did that, got the court order, we were able to track him down, and eventually, late in that year, his computers were confiscated. They broke into his apartment and confiscated all that stuff. And part of the reason we got the cooperation from Argentina was that he also broke into their telephone PBXs down there and was using that to call Harvard's dial-ups and break in from there. Next story, oh, by the way, he eventually pleaded guilty just a few months ago so that he could have a chance to come to the United States again, because otherwise he would have been arrested next time he came to the States. China, we saw some telnet activity into one of our machines in Hawaii, and this machine happened to be a mail server also, and we saw this Chinese person logging in as an admiral, one of the admiral's accounts, and going through this admiral's email, and we were wondering, what's this admiral doing in China? Because we didn't know of any admirals there. And we called up the admiral, said, are you in China? Oh no, he was in Okinawa. What we found out is that how he normally read his mail was Eudora over POP, dialing up a local ISP, which happened to route through Japan. We were eventually able to figure out that it was one of the ISPs in Japan who had a sniffer somewhere, and passwords were captured. Somehow the Chinese got that information. The Chinese were then using that information to get into his accounts via telnet, read his email. The thing that alerted us to it was we saw a change in pattern. We normally only saw POP activity from this person. Now, all of a sudden, from another country, there was telnet activity, and that set off some alarms, and so we knew bad stuff was happening. But again, static passwords are vulnerable. They should not go out in the clear. We saw a lot of problems last year with IMAP vulnerabilities. There was some buffer overflow problems, and there were some exploit tools out there. We saw a lot of sweeps of the network, port 143, just looking for IMAP. And what we found was all the sysadmins that were putting up Linux machines in the 5.0, 5.1, 5.2 days, all those machines had this vulnerability. The hackers were finding them, breaking into the IMAP port. And here was a case of dumb system administrators. When they installed Linux, it said, do you want all the services? And they said, sure, cool. Turned everything on, whether they needed it or not. And so all the ports were wide open. They didn't patch anything, weren't even aware that IMAP was there or even turned on. And so all the systems were getting hacked. And then from there, they were installing sniffers and trojaning the machines, capturing passwords, trying to break into other machines. So it wreaked quite a bit of havoc there for a while last year. Next one that we see a lot of, and it continues today, is trying to exploit the PHF problem. If you remember, this is the one that was discovered quite a while back already, where PHF, it's a piece of test software that comes with the Apache web server, and it had a vulnerability that you could literally ask it for any file. And right from a web browser, if you knew the appropriate incantation, you could just say, give me the password file, and you'd get it instantly in text. Very easy to exploit. And we saw a lot of people trying to attempt to exploit that, grabbing our password files and other files, especially after the source for this attack was published in 2600 magazine. And what we did is, what most sites did is they just turned it off, just disabled PHF. That was the standard fix. What we did is we replaced it. We wrote our own PHF, which was made to look like the real one. You want a password file? We'll give you a password file. But what you got was a password file that had lots of passwords in it, and they were guaranteed to be non-crackable. It was sort of random gibberish for the encrypted string. And so we were hoping to tie up their crack engines and waste their time. But what we also did is while we had them online, we asked their browsers lots of interesting information. Give me your cookies, give me your other stuff. Exploit lots of browser vulnerabilities. And but don't quote me on that, because I don't know if it's legal or not. But I figure if you're going to look at us, we can look at you in return. So that's been an interesting tool because we've gathered lots of information from that. The next one happened just a couple of months ago. We had a visit from the Serbia anti-NATO group, and they left us a present one morning. And see if I have it here. This appeared on our anonymous FTP server, just in the incoming space, appropriately protected incoming space. They just dropped a file there, which was a web page. And I can't read the stuff at the top. I don't even know what character set that is. But it says, anti-NATO, all of your databases are history. This is just a start. We are very serious. Signed, Serbian Angels. This was happening at the same time we saw in the press that other DoD systems were getting attacked and broken into. All they did at our place was just drop this on an FTP server. Now, when we saw this, we kind of laughed about it, and it was funny, and we hung it up on the wall and said, this is cool, isn't this funny? The problem is one of the local investigator types got a hold of this, and he went paranoid. He took this thing and actually wrote up an official secret incident report, which went way up the chain, saying that we had gotten broken into and the Serbians had taken over all our computers. And it just shows how paranoid some people can get if they don't understand. And so when I got called into the captain's office and said, you didn't tell me we got broken into by the Serbians, we were told we're supposed to be on alert and be looking for this stuff. And I said, well, do you know what they did? Oh yeah, they broke into our computers. They crashed everything, and it's the Serbians have just taken over the world. And I says, no. They put it on our anonymous FTP server. Well, what's that? And I explained to him, this is the equivalent of someone just walking in off the street, not even coming past the guard shack through the guard gate, but just on the bulletin board outside the security perimeter, just posting this piece of paper on the bulletin board. Now, would you consider that a major break-in? Well, of course not. But they didn't understand the technology. And so they went paranoid and wrote up huge incidents report over just this single file. Printer hacking. We used to think printers were not a problem. What could you do to a printer? You can send files to it. The worst is maybe denial of service attack by just wasting all the paper, constantly jamming it up. Until one day, a few months ago, in tracking down a problem, we found that this one particular printer, this user was queuing their printouts to it, and there was a long delay before the paper would come out. And when we were doing the analysis, we found out that it would go to the printer, and then because of some things that had been modified in the printout went to Russia, and then the Russians sent it back to the printer after they made a copy, of course, and then it eventually came out. So the user just thought it was a local problem, the network's kind of slow, but the Russians had somehow hacked into this printer and redirected the output and then requeued it again to make it look like nothing was happening. And when we really started looking at it, we found that printers these days, they do SNMP, they have Telnet, they have password, FTP, they have web pages for system administration. So you can go in through various means, or if you have the Jet admin software, you can go into port 9100 or whatever it is and do lots of interesting things to the printers. People installing printers didn't change the passwords, didn't turn anything off, just plugged the printer in, did the bare minimum necessary to make it work, had no idea of the security vulnerabilities until we started seeing a lot of the activity over the last couple of months. And so we've tried fixing this problem, and it's actually very hard because we found the printer vendors don't know how to secure their stuff. The older, very oldest printers have a lot of the things like passwords and so forth embedded in the firmware, and you can't get upgrades to it. So you literally can't fix it. You have to block it with router filters or something like that so it can't get beyond a local network. Some of the newer printers, the Canon copier / printers with the network interfaces, they're also bad. You cannot protect the darn things. You can't change the passwords, turns off the services, and so forth. You can do some of that, but not to the point to make it secure. And so we've had to ban some of those off of our network. So it was another wake-up call a few months ago, and it's turned out to be a real tough problem for us to fix, and because of the lack of support, mainly from the printer vendors. Another story, Melissa virus. That was had a lot of notoriety over the last month or so. And in this case, what I think was interesting is how different people reacted to it, how quickly people were able to respond to it. The fleet response, that is, this is the operational fleet, the part of the Navy that has ships moving around, they thought they were very successful because they discovered it quickly and were able to, within a few hours, go through all their networks and eradicate it. The Marines thought they were very successful because when they detected it, they instantly were able to unplug from the internet. And I actually was in a meeting last week where the head Navy guy in charge of security and the head Marine guy were arguing about this because the Navy guy said, well, we heard your general couldn't get his email for 3 days because you unplugged from the internet. Oh yeah, but this shows how secure we are because we only have 2 attachment points so we could instantly unplug them. And arguing back and forth about whether this was good or bad to be able to quickly unplug from the internet. Now, most people think this is a bad thing because what a great way to have a denial of service attack is just, release a virus and instantly the Marines unplug from the world. But believe it or not, this is the way DoD is thinking. If you read some of the recent press, they're going to harden the NIPRNet, and they're going to make sure that it only has a few connection points. It's kind of like back to the old mail bridge thinking, if you remember those days between MailNet and ARPANET. They wanted to instantly unplug in case of an attack. But so much stuff breaks in the process, and we're relying so heavily on those networks that it's really a bad thing. So it really is going to turn into a denial of service. There were some scary things about Melissa because of the traffic it generated, especially for some of our ships, which have very low bandwidth. It clogged up a lot of the channels, and so it was definitely a denial of service in its own right. What we do at our site is we try to minimize the scope of the problem. We can't use firewalls at our place because typically they slow down the traffic to the internet. You know, the typical bastion host type of firewall is just way too slow. And so we put a lot of our effort into intrusion detection, doing vulnerability assessments, scanning our networks on a regular basis, especially all the new machines, using commercial software and also some of our own tools, doing risk analysis, have that team of 4 people that just go around and do nothing but system cleanup and certification, try to do awareness training so that system administrators have more of a clue, and trying to keep ourselves out of the newspaper, which is sometimes difficult. But what we actually do is we try to put an appropriate spin on it and get to the press before they get to us. So if we know of an incident, we'll actually call them up and say, hey, we're good guys, we discovered it. Rather than them call us and say, did you know? And then if you don't know, then, well, you got broken into and you get a very negative spin. And so we'll often be the ones to call them and try to get the positive spin. Now, I wanted to say about working with some of the ISPs. When we see an incident, somebody's trying to break in, doing scans or whatever, we'll try to get the ISP that's closest to the intruder, and so we can contact them and say, did you know what's happening? Here's the information, here's the logs. If you could take it the next step and find this guy and shut him down or do whatever's appropriate for your AUP, then we'd appreciate, thank you very much. Now, a lot of the ISPs, there's no response to the emails we send. Maybe we're sending to the wrong address, maybe we don't know where to send it to. But we try our best to find appropriate points of contact, and still a lot of them, there's no replies. A lot of them also have automated replies, and that's it. You got your message, thank you very much, we'll get back to you, and then you never hear anything else. But a little over 50% actually do respond, and of some of those that do respond, we even get final closure. They'll say, not only did we take your information, but we tracked the guy down and we shut him off our network, or yeah, one of our machines was hacked and we were being used to exploit vulnerabilities and so forth, and we've closed our holes and so forth. And so it's nice to know what the closure is. And here's the relative comparison of the different types of responses. 30% no response at all, 16% we just get the auto reply and nothing else, 31% we get a personal reply, somebody actually responded, and 23% not only did we get a personal reply, but they told us what the final action was, which is nice. And so we're kind of all over the map here, and it would be nice to increase the green one there to have closure on a lot of these rather than the either no response or just the auto reply. And so that would be the one take-home point for you all, is it would be nice to raise the bar on how ISPs cooperate with one another. I know it's a lot of work sometimes, especially tracking down denial of service attacks with IP spoofing, but if we could cooperate, share information in better ways, have good points of contact and so forth, then it would really help this problem. And so here's some of my suggestions. Personal response is desired. That is not just an auto reply, but somebody actually contacting us back, saying you're working on the problem. And email or voice is fine. And then the closure. What was the outcome? What action was taken? Did you find the guy, or did you find the vulnerable machine and take care of it? It's also fun to share tools. If somebody's broken into a machine, they usually have a bunch of hacker tools, exploit tools. If we can take those and share them with each other, that's nice, because then we can look inside, see what they're doing, see if it compares to what's posted on the hacker boards and so forth, see if there's something new out there, and so it's nice to be able to do that. Taking the time to respond, even though it may seem like, you know, why should I help these Navy guys track down their intruder? I think it really benefits the whole community if we do cooperate, and it's really a two-way street, because if these script kiddies and hackers are trying to break into other machines if they're at our location, they're probably breaking into other places as well. And it helps the whole community if we just really try to stop that as much as possible, or at least build tools to track them down quickly. And as I mentioned before, finding the POCs for us isn't always easy, and we rely heavily on the WHOIS-based registries, at least the ones you can get to, Internet and Nick and Aaron and others. And so it would be nice if there was a great registry in the sky that said, here's all the abuse or security points of contact everywhere. I thought I'd put up the best and the worst. in terms of the scorecard that we did on how people respond. The best guy is this one in Brazil, Gomide, at gomide.com. He responds quickly. He dispatches the problem to the relevant person. He'll track him down which subnet this belongs to. Oh, that's so-and-so. Have him look into the situation. And he'll always get back to us with closure. Here's what we found. Here's what action we took. And that's very nice. The worst are Japan, Australia, and South Korea. They never reply. And I don't know why. A lot of the foreign countries do. They're very cooperative. But these guys are the worst. We see a lot of activity from them, and they almost never reply. Domestically, at home is about the worst. We see a lot of intruder activity from them and never get anything but an automated response. I think UUNet is the same way, but we don't have as many data points on them. So again, just pointing this out, not to put anybody on report or anything like that, but it's just, it'd be nice to raise the bar and get a little bit more consistency. Some of the trends we're seeing in the Department of Defense, in terms of trying to protect our networks, one of the things that people are excited about right now is PKI and using certificate-based tools to try to secure the infrastructure and trying to get the web pages all SSL enabled, using SMIME for email back and forth, not only for the digital signature but also for the privacy. As the Navy relies more and more on things like email for doing real-life operations, it's a little bit scary knowing how easy it is to spoof the from line and various other places. Just crank up a from line, say you're from some admiral, now go fire here or fire there, and that kind of traffic over the network is a bit of a concern. So using something like SMIME would help a lot. It turns out that one of the recent conflicts in the Middle East, the only official message traffic that is not with email, but the old AutoDIN system, official message traffic, there were only 3 that were sent. Usually it takes hundreds or thousands to have an operation. There were 3 sent. It was the alert order, the operation order, and the execute order. After that, everything was done on email. The whole war was run on email. And so if you think about that and how insecure non-protected email is, it's something DoD ought to be worrying about. Looking at VPN technology to try to encrypt a lot more information and extend the intranets using IPsec technology where we can. DNSSEC we're very, very interested in. The HPC community is heavily into Kerberos and Secure ID for protecting all of their mainframes, and they're 100% there. You can't get into one of the DoD supercomputers without Secure ID and Kerberos. The big buzzword these days is information assurance. Every year they got to come up with a new acronym for what they talk when they talk about network security. And right now it's called information assurance, or IA. Everything's got an IA acronym, and all the CIOs have an IA person. And so I don't know if it does anything. They just generate policy and not much else. And also there's these new computer network defense teams that are being stood up. It seems like every time there's a big incident, they get together. What do we need? Oh, we need a new incident team. They put a team together, and they're supposed to be stood up to respond. But they end up being very bureaucratic and not very helpful, especially now that we've got so many of these things that don't coordinate too well, and we need to do better there. We are trying to have a good perimeter defense with defense in depth, that is multiple security perimeters, and usually the outside perimeter is a very strong firewall, like rows of bastion hosts for scalability, and things like PIX boxes and multiple VPNs around the sides and outer routers and inner routers and intrusion detection. And if you see the map on this thing, it's almost whole network infrastructure in itself, just the security piece of it. And I'm not sure if that's a good solution or not, because it's going to be so complex that do we really understand what's inside and what the vulnerabilities are? But that's the way Navy is heading. A lot of policies and procedures that we have to put up with. Warning banners as an example. DoD is all paranoid about warning banners. Every single computer has to have a warning banner on it. And you can understand that for some of the things they're trying to do, but some of the systems that we have where they demand a warning banner, there's no place to put the warning banner. Like they want your email secured. Well, okay, where do I put that on the IMAP port? There's no way to have the banner, but you got to do it anyway because that's policy. And so a lot of brain dead thinking there. And also what we found is that I think there's really a law enforcement undercurrent here, because the warning banners, if you think about it, give them license to bypass all the privacy laws so that they can snoop on our networks as much as they want. Also, web content and access is a big deal. When they started looking around the network and saw how much information was given away freely on the web, including operational information, that was pretty scary. They decided it's time to shut that down, so a lot of disconnecting of web servers from the network, or at least protecting them. Infocon is a new term you might start hearing. You ever heard of DEF CON? We're going to DEF CON 4, DEF CON 5. Well, they have invented Infocon, and it's Infocon Alpha and Bravo and Delta and so forth, heightened awareness. Well, we're at Infocon Alpha right now because there's a slight increase in awareness because we're watching out for those Serbs that are trying to put things in our FTP anonymous servers and so forth. So actually, you go to some of the websites and you'll see flashing Infocon Alpha. I actually saw that the other day. IAVAs are Information Assurance Vulnerability Alerts. DoD puts these things out. Basically, it's just whatever CERT puts out saying, here's the kind of activity we see right now, the kind of vulnerabilities. They wrap it up into this very official thing and say, you must respond and look at every single system and make sure it complies and send a report back within 15 days or whatever. And it's just a lot more bureaucracy for us. Hardening of the network infrastructure, a lot of attention given to trying to secure the routing protocols. If you think about how easy they are to spoof, that's kind of scary. Also, they want better INA identification and authorization capability in the network devices, the routers, the switches, etc. Shouldn't just be able to telnet into them with an insecure password or whatever. And also, there's a desire to own the ATM infrastructure. And what I mean by that is they don't want you just to buy an ATM service, because there is no security in the signaling and the routing domain in the ATM world. And if you think about it, it's really fairly easy to put up circuits, create denial of service attacks by reserving all the bandwidth, doing other bad things. And so there's policy coming down that says you want to do ATM, don't subscribe to it, you have to build it yourself and run it over a sonnet layer or something like that. And this is actually the last slide. Some of our concerns and issues. The lack of security tools for ATM is getting to be more and more of a problem, especially we in DoD. I mean, our network has OC3 ATM to the internet. That's how we connect to the outside world. And what we have to do is bring it down to 100 T or 50 or something like that, just so that we can use standard commercial devices to do intrusion detection. And we'd like a solution to that. And so anybody that has ideas, we're looking at a couple of things, like taking the OCXMON stuff and tweaking it to break out some of the streams and then feeding it into the 100 megabit solutions. And there's some case that's going to work. Also, the denial of service attacks are a real concern, especially protecting our networks and then tracking the intruders. For us in the DoD, if you think about the fleet and how heavily it relies on the network and their very constrained network connections, the biggest shifts, the carriers, the best they have is a T1, and it goes through a satellite. So small pipes, high delay. Most of the shifts have 64K and some have an awful lot less. And so it's very easy to shut down one of those networks just by overloading it. Also, as was mentioned in one of the earlier talks, the IP spoofing is especially hard to track. And even using tools like DOS Tracker, that's great, but it relies on certain hooks in Cisco software, which we found out is a little bit different in every version, and so it's not a good solution. It may be better now, but it's just very, very painful to track those type of things down. So any ideas there would be great. The Navy is using insecure and unreliable servers a lot, that is on the ships. Now, to make it politically correct, I didn't say Windows NT, but that is the problem. A couple of years ago, I think a bunch of the captains and admirals got wined and dined up in Redmond and found out that this Windows NT stuff was just great. And so they said, this is the solution to our problem. Now, in their minds, the problem was the sailors couldn't figure out command line interfaces on the Unix servers. And so they're going to fix it. move out the Unix servers into the Windows NT. What they found was, after they had a number of brand new ships dead in the water for hours at a time because they had to do complete restarts because of some of the unreliabilities, and blue screen of death and all the other stuff, they're learning very quickly. And so actually, we're finding the trend is Unix is kind of back in again because they want industrial strength systems, and actually Linux is looking very attractive for a number of things. So it's come full circle. So that's a real problem. Also, the other concern is the lost management capabilities because of the network hardening. As you disable ICMPs because of you don't want denial of service attacks, now you can't do pings anymore. Or you turn off source direction and you can't do the loose source routing or source routing with trace route anymore. Or you turn off directed broadcast. That used to be a good tool. You just ping the broadcast address, find out if anybody's home or what's out there and so forth. Can't do that anymore as we disable directed broadcasts. And so it'd be nice to find some management administrative tools which are not susceptible to those kind of attacks so that we have good tools. And then the latest thing is I just read a report yesterday that Clinton is going to attack Serbian infrastructure by hiring hackers. And seriously, this was out on one of the news things. It was supposed to be a top secret thing, but somehow it got leaked. And they're going to go try to attack the banks in Serbia and steal all Slobodan's money and shut them down. And so, sort of cyber warfare in reverse. We're attacking somebody. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. That was it. Just sort of wanted to do a random walk of some of the things we're seeing, some of the trends. And time for questions?
Well, actually, no. We went. I think the mic's dead. Mic on? Great. We went way over, but since we went way over, might as well continue the trend, and let's take a few questions.
Okay. Quick.
By the way, please introduce yourselves. I mean, I think everyone knows who you are, but still, fairly. Everyone, if you do go up to the mic, please introduce yourself. It's just nice courtesy for me.
Hi, I'm Avi Friedman, and we in the back row had an interesting idea. Perhaps you'd like to follow what some of the people who like to play with hackers do and set up an ftp.dod.mil that maps to 127.0.0.1.
That would be fun.
I was just going to say there are some providers that will give you IP space that you can filter at your border, but that does break, then you'd be able to do diagnostics internally, but not necessarily externally. And one other thing, we are listening to a talk about security, and the 5 people who have their laptops completely open to this whole network should probably turn off any Microsoft thing that they're running, just as a comment.
Okay.
In the back. I'm John Jan of Cable Wireless. I really welcome what you listed over there, your requirements from the ISPs. And we have most of the things you have there. And let me just explain that we do have a, you can't reach our humans' voices with 800 numbers, but we do like you to fill out the web-based ticketing system so that the incident report so that it gets into our system. And unless you really have problem of doing that, we do take down by the phone, and our operators will put in the your report into the ticketing system, so everything will get on track. And the other thing you said about the response time, and usually you first get the automated response, and that doesn't mean that we're not working on. We're working on that, but on the other hand, we do need our customers. Usually, every case is our customers using our the address space during an attack. We need to get a response from our customers before we can respond to you. And usually these customers are not educated as well educated as the rest of the group, as ours or you, and that takes time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Understand. Okay. One more question over here.
Hi, I'm Bill Woodcock. An issue that's been coming up in conversation a lot with the certs at our customer sites that I'd like your take on is as they start getting more and more into using VPNs, there's always the tendency to think of the VPN or a firewall or whatever as being this sort of very secure boundary around their network and negating the need for host security within that boundary. The problem with VPNs, obviously, is that you lose the ability to define a physical perimeter, and suddenly you've got things that you're treating as secure, which you have no physical security at, no idea where they might be physically, no idea what else might be connected to the networks. How are you dealing with that?
A couple of things that come to mind. We do see that trend a lot where if the host operators think there is a good, strong perimeter defense, that they don't need any additional defense. That is a very serious problem on the DoD's secret network. It's called SIPRNet, because everybody hooks up a computer thinks, well, it's totally disconnected from anything on the outside world. They shouldn't have to worry about protecting it. The problem is the community of SIPRNet is about 500,000 users. So the term you hear going around is, shared secrets with 500,000 of my closest friends. And so it's not very secure in that sense, and they're trying to add a bunch of security. As far as the VPN issue, one of the things we are doing there is make sure that wherever we bring a VPN connection in, at the connection point, we're installing intrusion detection systems to make sure that we don't lose that, because, of course, over the VPN it's typically encrypted. And we're trying very hard to make sure a lot of the back doors are shut down internally so that there aren't other paths in. So hopefully that answers some of the questions. One more?
My name is Chris Capuccio. Have you guys looked at using tools like Network Flight Recorder or other intrusion tools?
Yeah, we've used almost all of them out there. We played with NFR too.
And in a lack of security tools for ATM, there's a couple of companies that actually make ATM cards that you can put into PCs and use something like Network Flight Recorder with that. Does that yield any kind of...
Haven't tried that particular case. We were using some of the commercial tools for intrusion detection and also some of the other DoD tools, and we weren't able to add new network devices to them easily, and so haven't tried the NFR solution, but it's worth considering. Thanks. Looks like it.
Great, thank you.